Kia ora team, before we jump into the podcast, I'm excited to announce that this episode of Playthrough is brought to you by Canterbury of New Zealand's Speed Infinite Elite Firm Ground Boots. That's right, the iconic Kiwi brand that's been around for well over 100 years have been associated with some of the world's finest sporting teams like the All Blacks, British and Irish Lions, the Springboks, the Kangaroos, State of Origin Rugby League, the list goes on, you get the picture. They're one of, if not the lightest boots on the market, super comfortable, ultra durable, and they'll help you get the best out of your performance on the touch field as well. Now, our friends at Canterbury of New Zealand are hooking our touch community up with a 20% discount. Head to nz.canterbury.com, canterburynz.com.au or canterbury.com, so that's the New Zealand, the Australian and the UK websites. Punch in the code 7th Touch, all one word, and you'll unlock that 20% discount that you can use across their entire range. Now, if that wasn't enough, they're also going to help me give away 4 pairs of these boots in the lead up to Touch World Cup. And on top of that, they're also going to chip in an extra 4 pairs of Canterbury slides as well. So do yourself a favor, head to the 7th Touch Instagram page, check the giveaway post. It'll be pinned at the top of the page. Follow the caption for the details to enter, and you could be walking away with a pair of Canterbury slides, Canterbury boots, courtesy of our friends at Canterbury of New Zealand. Let's jump into the potty. We're all set to go here. And he's called Playthrough. Kia ora team, Tyler Falava, and a huge welcome back to another episode of Playthrough, the 7th Touch podcast. I am your host, Tivoli Guthrie, and thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join me. I really appreciate your company, and I also appreciate those of you who have hit subscribe, hit follow, and just for your general support of the podcast over the first couple of episodes. It's been massive, and I really, really do appreciate it. If I could just ask for a quick favor from those of you who haven't yet, if I could just ask if you could take the time to quickly scroll down, hit subscribe or hit follow, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'd really appreciate that as well. It just means that I can grow the podcast and in turn help grow the game of touch footy, which is hopefully anyway something that both you and I are passionate about. Now, as it stands, we are 2 weeks away, a mere 2 weeks away from the biggest showpiece event on the touch calendar, and that is the 2024 Touch World Cup. It is shaping up to be the biggest event in Touch World Cup history, taking place from the 15th to the 21st of July up in Nottingham, England, and we are counting down the hours, counting down the minutes, counting down the days. 14 days is all we have to wait. We've had to wait 5 years, or almost 5 years. Oh, I suppose over 5 years, and there's just 14 more days to wait. So really excited for this one. As I mentioned, it's set to be the biggest World Cup in our short history. We've been running these World Cups, I say we, like I was there from the start, but Touch has been running World Cup since 1988, the most recent being in 2019. Now, just for some context for this upcoming World Cup, at the first one in 1988, there were 5 nations and 4 grades. So I think there was 17 teams. And fast forward to 2024, where we have 188 teams from 39 nations across 13 grades. Some 60% growth from the 2019 event. So, yeah, huge congratulations and a huge pat on the back to all of you, each of you who are making this happen, who are travelling up to Nottingham in about a week's time. It's actually, I suppose I say in a week's time, but it's been really cool to have a nosy around on the social media and seeing those of you who have already left and, doing a little bit of pre-tournament travelling around Europe. That's, I suppose, what half the experience is heading to a different part of the world and getting to travel and experience different cultures and all of those good things. So, yeah, it's been exciting to keep up with. I know a lot of the nations are, dotting their I's and crossing their T's. They're putting in their last minute preparations back home, whether that's via training camps or individual trainings, or I've even seen a couple of jersey presentations already. And that's really awesome to see as well. It just means, that we're getting closer and that excitement is slowly building. And I'm sure it'll reach fever pitch once we hit Nottingham on July 15th. Now, if you have been following our social media social media accounts, you'll see that we've got a giveaway. We've linked up with Canterbury of New Zealand, giving away 4 pairs of their brand new Speed Infinite Elite firm ground boots, as well as 4 pairs of Canterbury slides. If you haven't already, jump onto our Instagram page, follow the details, and you could be walking away with a pair of boots and pair of slides, courtesy of our friends at Canterbury of New Zealand. And in addition to that, if you haven't already heard, they've hooked us up with a 20% discount as well that we can use across the entire range on the New Zealand, Australian and UK websites. So head to nz.canterbury.com if you're in New Zealand, canterburynz.com.au if you're in Australia, or canterbury.com if you're in the UK, and you can use the code 7th Touch to walk away with a 20% discount. Grab heaps of gears. So that's just taking care of the bills. And if you look behind me, now last week we had a couple of different strips up there. This week we've switched it up. We had Peter Walters on our Goat Range tee, and this week we're rocking with Jermaine Dayberg Muir. While we're on that, huge congratulations to Drum, as well as the other inductees, brand new inductees to the Touch Football Australia Hall of Fame. Massive congratulations from me, as well as I'm sure on behalf of the Touch community as well. Absolute legends of the game, the likes of Bo Dela Cruz, Gavin Shuker, Gary Sonder, Christy and Amanda Judd, Louise Winchester, and I think that might be all. My apologies if I've missed anyone out, but absolute giants of our game, legends, and a well-deserved induction into the TFA Hall of Fame. And then next to it, last week we had my debut singlet, that one there representing the mighty Touch Box from South Africa from the same tournament. Now, I said that the strips that I'd put up there would have a bit of a story, but to be fair, I don't think there is much to this one. I mentioned that I headed to the 2011 World Cup. That was in Edinburgh, and my brother was in the same team, and I genuinely think that he might have traded some kit for a South African one, and I've somehow ended up with it. So, sorry, Tums. South Africa, those actually I remember were some of the tightest strips that I think I've ever seen. A big shout out to the Touch Box. I think in the men's open that year they actually came third as well. They beat Japan in the semi-final. So a rich pedigree from the Touch Box. I suppose moving on. Just to recap what we're doing on these podcast episodes as we build up to the World Cup happening in a couple of weeks' time, is we're just running the rule over the open grades, trying to build some excitement, breaking each grade down. We did the mixed open last week. We've got the women's open today, and then we'll do the men's open next week as we head into the tap-off date. Just breaking down each of the teams, but that's, just based on information that is available to me. So I'll just reiterate, these are educated predictions just based on things that I know, whether that's team lists that have been released, past results, prior form in previous tournaments, results, social media accounts, what you see online. So by no means is it an exact science, and there are definitely some holes to be poked through. Happy to be proven wrong, as I mentioned last week. So, it also doesn't take into account any late mail, such as, late injuries or late withdrawals. I'm not privy to a lot of that information. So let's get underway. The Women's Open grade. So for the Women's Open grade this year, there are 21 teams, which is really cool. Last World Cup, there were 17, so that's a slight increase for additional teams within the grade. It's been broken down into 2 pools, Pool A and Pool B. 11 teams in Pool A, 10 teams in Pool B. And of those teams, of the 21 teams, 7 of them didn't compete at the last World Cup. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are actually competing in their first World Cup in the Women's Open grade ever, which is, just speaks to the growth of, not just Touch in the Women's Open grade, but Touch worldwide as well, Touch across all grades. So that's really cool to see. And then from those pools, they'll get a top 4 qualifier, which will progress to the next stage of the tournament, which will be the quarterfinals. So top 4 qualifiers will meet in the quarterfinals. Winners of that will go on to the semis. Winners of that will meet in the grand final. Now, I suppose just on that, in terms of the finals format, now the last couple of World Cup tournaments, it's gone straight to a top 4 semi-final. Now, I think just adding in an additional stage just, I don't know, adds a bit of intrigue or adds a bit of that sort of unknown element into the knockout stages, because as we know, when it comes to knockout touch football, anything can happen. You know, if all it takes is the momentum to swing the opposite way, or for a mistake to happen, or for a team to not be on their game. And I think that really makes that top 8 really exciting. So personally, I'm excited to see. I know that in the men's open as well, they're running quarterfinal system. In the mixed open, they're running a round of 16. Just once it gets to, there's just something about touch footy knockout time that just adds a dose of excitement. Which will be interesting to see for the teams that can qualify for those quarterfinal positions. Now, in Pool A, we've got Australia, Belgium, Canada, Cook Islands, France, Japan, Lebanon, Papua New Guinea, Singapore, Thailand, and Wales. So 11 teams, and then the 10 teams that'll be in Pool B. But just looking at the teams, like at a glance, I think there's a clear team that'll probably top the pool, and that'll be Australia. But you know, the other 3 spots I think are up for grabs. You've got Cook Islands, that a lot of them are Australian based. You've got France, who have qualified for their first ever Women's Open final at Euros last year. You've got Japan, who are the reigning bronze medalists. You've got Singapore, who they played in that 3rd and 4th game, and they were back-to-back bronze medalists in 2011, 2015. You know, you've got Papua New Guinea and Wales, who finished in the top 8, as well as the other 3 or 4 teams will be competing in their first ever Women's Open grade at a World Cup, or their first in a very long time. So in no particular order, I suppose we'll start with the reigning bronze medalists, Japan. Now, Japan, they competed at the Trans-Tasman last year, and their women's team is super exciting. I think led by Kana Kuraishi. She's a gun. She is, I think, my favorite women's player in the world at the moment, really. She's got slick feet, great footwork, a great read and understanding of the game, and she works really hard as well. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how she goes at this World Cup, because at the last one she was incredible for the Japanese. She was a big part of their bronze medal winning performance, and I think just with an additional 4 to 5 years worth of growth, you could see the form that she was in at the Trans-Tasman last year, and she was a huge part of that Japanese team. Now, that Japanese team last year, they only lost by 3 to New Zealand, and that was in their second game, and then they lost by 5 in the third game as well. So, you know, they're not that far off. I know I don't know if troubled Australia is the right word, but they definitely put up a fight. And I think outside of those top 2 nations, outside of Australia and New Zealand, Japan have a really strong chance of maintaining their 3rd position, maintaining that bronze medal at this World Cup. So, yeah, I'm personally really excited about Japan. And, yeah, we'll see if they can build on those 2023 performances, because if they can, there'll be a real, there'll be a nation that a lot of the other teams will have to look out for. Moving on to, let's go Belgium. Now, Belgium is an interesting case because they're competing in their first ever World Cup in the women's grade, but they've been around since 2014, in the women's grade in particular. Now, they've got, so what's that, 10 years worth of experience. They've, competed in multiple Euros tournaments. At the last couple, they've finish sort of fourth, fifth out of about 6 or 7 teams. So yeah, they're sort of toiling away. I don't know if they'll trouble the top teams, but I suppose they're building. They've got a couple of key pieces in there. They've got Jane Gimber, who's been around for a decade. Clara Drews has been around for a while. Tish Devawer, who's been around for a while as well. So they've got some great pieces, and yeah, a lot of them have played in the Euros as well. So, it's not as though they're getting a completely brand new team like some of the other nations are. And, I would like to see from them a little bit of growth from their 2023 Euros campaign. They built a little bit from the 2022 campaign to the 2023 campaign. And then it's just another 12 months worth of growth. It'll be interesting to see how they improve and how they progress through the tournament as well. Another European team that made waves last year at Euros was France, and France is another team I think that are really exciting. So similar to the mixed team, I remember mentioning in last weekend's podcast as well that the mixed open for France, they made history by becoming the first French team to make the Euros final in an open grade, which is, such a massive achievement. But I think what's also, just as important is that not only did their mix do it, but their women's open did it as well. And they were led by Cécile Ma as well as the Henri sisters. And, that just gives them a good core group of players. I think they've got about 8 that are returning from that squad. And they'll be looking to build on their 2019 performance. They came 11th in Malaysia. So, that's, if you look at 5 years worth of growth within that time period, I think they've grown probably one of the most out of all the women's open teams that'll be competing at this upcoming World Cup. And I think they've got a lot to prove, especially to back up that performance and show that it wasn't a fluke. And they'll have, I would say that they'd have some pretty lofty goals. I think they'd want to definitely qualify for that quarterfinal berth. But they're in a pretty tough pool. I'd say out of the two pools, Pool A would probably be the harder of the two. Although that's pretty debatable. One player from the French team that I'm excited to see is Leah Martin Mendez Lopez. She was playing, just the team, playing at the Atlantic Youth Touch Cup last year in the under 15 mixed. So, that would indicate that this year should be about 15, 16. And the reason she caught my eye at the last tournament, or at the tournament last year, is that she was playing in the mixed team, but she was running the cutter in the middle, man. She was she was dictating play, she was playmaking, she's got a great read on the game, excellent vision. So I'm really excited to see how she can make that step up into the women's open division. France, I think they'll have a lot to prove, and they'll definitely want to try and get that breakthrough performance. They started the work last year, and we'll see if they can continue on at this World Cup. Canada and Thailand, they're pretty interesting cases, as well as Lebanon as well, actually. Canada haven't been at any World Cup since the first one. They competed in the very first World Cup in 1988, one of 5 nations to do so, but they haven't made any appearances in international touch since, which is a really interesting case. So they'll be making their long-awaited return to international touch football. From their team list, I've seen that they've got quite a few rugby converts as well as new players, and I'm sure a lot of you who have come from that rugby background, you'll be first to know that it's a tough transition. Yes, there are transferable skills, your catch pass and your read on the game. As well as those soft skills like footwork as well, but it definitely is a completely different game. So it'll be interesting to see how they react, especially being drawn in that tough pool. They'll have some tough games to start. but they'll be relying on a lot of their players who have come through the Asian system as well. So yeah, we'll see how Canada goes. I think personally they'll struggle, unfortunately. But I think even just having them back in the international fold, I may have mentioned it last weekend as well, just having them back in the international fold is such a huge achievement for Canada, and hopefully it gives them that launching pad for them to be able to, move on to future tournaments. Because how awesome would it be to, see them? I know they compete at the USA Nationals, but how awesome would it be to see, some sort of annual event or biannual event where Canada and America can play off against each other, or even play against, the likes of Chile from South America. I think there's just a lot of potential if they can sort of keep up and sustain that type of growth from what they're building this year. So similar to them, Thailand, although they haven't played before at a World Cup, they'll be playing in their first ever World Cup. I suppose they'll be a difficult team to sort of gauge. The Asian system is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit different because, they do play, a lot of the local tournaments. You've got tournaments like the Singapore Cup, and as well as some of their domestic competitions. Then you've got some that are in Malaysia as well as China, Hong Kong, where the growth of the sport is still developing, but they've got plenty of numbers that can get in and play the game. It's huge in the sort of university level, sort of trying to get it building in the school system. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure how they'll be able to translate from that to an open women's level on the international stage. I know they've got varying levels of skill, so being able to juggle that throughout the course of a tournament, I think is going to be tough for them. Lebanon are pretty much in the same boat. They've competed at World Cups before, traditionally a lot more, a lot stronger in the men's competition than the women's. This will in fact be their first competition, or their first foray into women's open international competition. I think just by glancing at their team list, a lot of them, or most, if not all of them, I'm not entirely sure, will be Lebanon-based. I know their men's team as well as their mixed team, a lot of them are Australian-based, have that sort of, that Western Sydney sort of style and feel. But this women's open team, I'm not too familiar with a lot of them, so I think a lot of them are based in Lebanon. I know Touch is big in Beirut, so it'll be exciting to see what they can bring to the table. Especially with all the work that Michael Moussa and the likes of Jason Stanton and that are doing within the Lebanese touch community over there, and trying to build that relationship between Lebanon and Australia. So, it'll be interesting. I think the name that probably stands out is Emma Tuma, mainly due to the last name. Not entirely sure whether there's any relation to the former Emu Trent Tuma, but I suppose that was just a name that stood out to me. But Sophia Hakime, I think she is probably one to watch from the Lebanese team. She definitely knows how to find her way to the try line, top try scorer at the Lebanese Touch Championships. It'll be interesting to see how Lebanon go in their first international tournament for the Women's Open. Moving on to, I think, the dark horses within the entire women's grade, which I think will be the Cook Islands. The Cook Islands haven't had a women's open team since 1999. They came fourth at that tournament, and it's been a long 20 plus years for them to get back to this stage. And I think I suppose the reason why I like the Cook Islands is they're building a community of, they've got a strong presence in the northern suburbs of Sydney. So if you look at the likes of Manly, the Northern Beaches Renegades, and then you look at the Sydney Scorps teams that play at NTL, a lot of the players that are in these teams, have that experience of playing elite level touch within Australia. And I think, they're starting to do some of that work where they're building that connection back with the island in Rarotonga. So, yeah, I'm excited to see how they'll go. Now, they unfortunately won't have Pihuka Duff, who was named in the squad. She'll be in the NRLW, but, that's offset by the pickup of Alia Paki, who was in the Australia 7 system. But, they've got guns all over the park that really know how to play, and they've been playing together for a while. They've got that real sort of whānau connection. And, the names or the surnames that you've got within the team lists, the likes of the Berrymans, the Nathans, the Masters, they've been playing for a long time, playing together for a long time, and not just in this grade, but across multiple grades, across multiple ages, a wide age range. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see what the Cook Islands can cook up. Pardon the terrible pun. It's at the World Cup. I think the one to look out for, though, would be Coco Masters. I saw a little bit of her play at the Australia Pacifica Touch Cup back in March, held up there in Queensland, and she was running the cutter for them as well. So she had some good combinations, and yeah, I'm really excited to see how the Cook Islands can go. And I think quarterfinal would be the minimum for them. I reckon they've got a real red hot chance of cracking the semis, especially when they do the crossover at the quarterfinal stage. I reckon they've got a big chance of toppling whoever they come up against and nabbing a semi-final spot. Moving on to Singapore. Now, Singapore's an interesting one because they are two-time bronze medalists from 2011 and 2015. They've been taken for, well over 10 years now by Chris Wall, a little man who is a former New Zealand representative in the Men's Open. He actually won the Player of the Series award back in 2003 in Japan. So a long-time representative, Chris Wall, and his influence has really rubbed off on this Singaporean outfit over the last 10 or so years. And you only have to look at those back-to-back bronze medal performances, and then they came within a whisker of making it 3 in a row in Malaysia at the last World Cup. I think what's interesting about the side that he's picked is that, apart from, I'd say probably Claudia Sung, as well as Jazz Tan, those are the elder statesmen of the team. They'll bring the experience, but a lot of them are quite young. They've got a really young look to them. Maybe that's something that he's identified as, an area that they could improve from that 2019 performance, or whether that's through necessity, I'm not entirely sure. But they've got 7 players that'll be backing up from the Asia Pacific Youth Touch Cup in 2023. So, Singapore will be coming back to the World Cup stage with something to prove as well. I think, those Asian countries, Japan, Singapore in particular, they'll be battling it out, I think, for that semi-final spot. So, we'll see if Singapore can make a comeback and really try and nab that bronze medal position once more. Papua New Guinea is, it's a tough one with PNG. So just following their socials over the last couple of months, it's been riddled with sort of inner turmoil and sort of backstage politics, which is a real shame because they were pretty strong at the last World Cup and the last 2 World Cups in the open grades. They've won a couple of bronze medals. Their women's came 6th back in 2019, and it's just a real shame that a lot of those inner turmoils are sort of stacking up against them. They've lost their head coach, Peter Stoddard, who was supposed to be, he's a former World Cup winner himself, and he was really big on building touch and building those connections between the PNG community within Australia as well as back in Papua New Guinea. And, they're a really talented bunch. So, I hope they can field a competitive team. It will be a little bit unsure. I'll be a little bit unsure about whether they can back up their performance from the last World Cup. They'll have that hint of uncertainty. So, Yeah, I'm not entirely sold on PNG, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I hope that there are some teams that would be able to prove me wrong. It'll be really cool to see them back up that performance and even go better, but one of those cases I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Wales are another interesting one, I reckon, because they're in a sort of rebuilding phase now. Back from 2019, as I mentioned, a lot of teams kind of had a hard reset, and I think Wales are definitely one of those teams. If you look at, it was sort of a changing of the guard from that 2019 team into the new World Cup cycle. From the 2019 team, they've lost some really experienced pieces, the likes of Rachel Stevens, Miriam Evans, Amberley Ruck, Lowry Morgan. So we'll see whether their new players can sort of pick up the slack and pick up the pieces. Now, they've got quite a few that are backing up from the past couple of Euros tournaments, and they'll be led by Ceres Ballet, she'll be their captain, she'll be their inspirational leader, and she'll probably be their key playmaker as well. So they're slowly picking up the pieces. They came 8th in 2019. I don't think we can read too much into that, just due to the fact that, there is lots in terms of change of personnel. But they narrowly missed out on a finals berth at the last couple of Euros tournaments. So, we'll see whether they can build on that, and, they'll be hoping to challenge for what I'm sure will be sort of that second, third, fourth position within Pool A. And last but not least, the favourites within not only Pool A but within the tournament itself, Australia, the Emus. They are, when it comes to women's touch, they're just an absolute juggernaut. I liken them to like the dream team. The 92 Olympics, the US basketball team, just because of their personnel, the number of, or the caliber of players that they've been able to churn out over the years, and it's World Cup cycle after World Cup cycle. This team is relatively new in terms of the international scene. Yes, they do have a few pieces that have been there and done that. The likes of Kim Soo-see, Hannah Dyball, Danny Norman, Sammy Brisby. So they've got players that have been there and done that, and then they introduced a new wave of that sort of new talent at the Trans-Tasman last year. So yeah, they'll be absolutely massive. They'll be hard to beat, I think, and they showed their class at the Trans-Tasman last year. From their team at that Trans-Tasman, they've only made 3 changes. They've got 3 debutants coming into the side, and just looking at their team, they're just really balanced. They've got strike all over the park, and I think what makes him so dangerous is that Coach Swain Ravelli, he's got a pretty simple game plan when you look at it. Like, if you look at the way that they've played since he's taken over, they've got a pretty simple game plan. It's like they've got a pretty simple scoop setup, quickie setup, and then a sweep and maybe a peel play. And they'll work on, a couple of set piece plays, trick plays sort of every now and again, but it's not that often. But they just read well off each other. They can play both the static game and the run game. And they're just a really well-drilled side. There's no one that's bigger than the team. And I think over their last couple of campaigns, it's been really hard to pick one standout player. At the last Trans-Tasman, Rebecca Maimai and Rachel Jess ended up picking up the Players Player Award and I think the Coaches Award, but it could have, realistically, it could have gone to any one of those players. They're just, they're a class act, and I think they'll be pretty hard to beat in this tournament. One thing I did want to mention is that it's a bit of a try scoring watch, and I don't know how big you guys are on records, but Sammy Brisby, she's sitting on 30 World Cup tries. She's only got 20 left to hit that magical 50 mark, something that only Mariki Wadago's been able to do within the women's grade for Australia in particular, maybe even for international touch sort of across the board. And then another 26, or not another 26, but she's got 26 to actually surpass Mariki Watago as well. And the fact that she scored 17 at the Trans-Tasman last year within 6 games, I think she'll be well on track to to nab that record in 2024. So yeah, that's Pool A, 11 teams in all. It's quite a packed pool. I think obviously Australia will topple the pool. Japan, Singapore, I think will get a spot. And then it just comes down to that last one. I think that last one's going to be, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because, I was about to say Cook Islands would have nabbed it easy, but then you've left out France. So maybe France will be battling in there as well. Wales might have an outside shot. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. If I had to put some money on it, I'd put my money on Australia, Singapore, Japan, and the Cook Islands, I reckon. But yeah, really tough pool to call. And as I mentioned, once you get into knockout touch football, then, it's sort of anything can happen. We'll see. Now moving on to Pool B. Pool B headlined by New Zealand, runners-up at the last World Cup. And they'll be wanting to go one better. They've been the bridesmaids at every single World Cup since its inception, since 1988. And yeah, similar to their men's, they're due for a breakthrough at some point. Whether that's this year, I'm not too sure. They've got arguably a more athletic team than what they took to Malaysia in 2019. Just looking at their team list, they've got 5 debutants, but those debutants are all in pretty good form, based on the domestic competition. With Peter McIntyre as the coach. Peter Mac, I know him well. He was our coach for the 2013 Super Trans-Tasman series, and that was the first series we had won as a men's open contingent since 1993. So 20 years in the making, that one, and Peter Mac was definitely the mastermind behind that. And we'll see if he can work his magic with this team as well. They've got a strong squad, as I mentioned, really athletic, quite young. I'd say probably slightly younger than what they took to 2019 Malaysia. But we'll see how they go. Now, the way that Peter Mac likes running his teams, he likes running his combos. So, just looking at the team list, you've got your Waikato combination, you've got a North Harbour sort of Northern Strikers in the PTL combination. You've got more of a Central Auckland combination as well. So, I think it's a really balanced squad that Peter Mac has picked. And if you're looking at star players, I was hesitant in the lead up to Trans-Tasman, but I reckon it's Skylar Tainui-Takere. And the reason I would say I was hesitant before last Trans-Tasman is, purely because of not age, but experience. She really carves at women's level domestically. I just didn't know whether she would be able to translate that to the international scene. I wouldn't say that it was a nepotism pick, because that's unfair and it's not really justified. But I would say that I had my reservations and I had my doubts. Now, after not after World Cup, but after Trans-Tasman, did she prove those doubts wrong? Absolutely, 100%. She, really ran. She pretty much ran the team. It wasn't an experienced team. I think from the Trans-Tasman side, they only had like 3 players that had international experience at open women's level before. And she really stood up and showed that, her skill outshone her experience or lack thereof. So yeah, I think Skylar's probably going to be one to watch. She's only, I think, maybe 16, 17, so she's got plenty of years ahead of her. And it's a special moment for the McIntyre Tainui whānau, who have not only Skylar but her granddad Pete as the coach, as well as her mum Latoya. So a real nifty little thing there for that family that does so much for touch in New Zealand. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. And whether they can really push for that gold medal position. as you go down the list, you've also got Fiji. Fiji are a little bit unknown. They've got a team list out on their Facebook page, but it's sort of 26 players along, and just not entirely sure what to expect from them. They haven't quite hit their straps in the Women's Open grade. Their men's, have traditionally fared a little bit better over the last sort of decade or so, but their women's hasn't quite caught up. So we'll see how they go. I reckon their improvement from the last World Cup is probably what to keep an eye on. They came 14th at the last World Cup, and since the pandemic, they've had Tony Trad go over and do a little bit of work with the Fijian contingent as a whole. So yeah, as I mentioned, a real unknown quantity. I know that he doesn't like to strip away what makes Fiji Fiji. They do have that classic Fijian style where it's a little bit off the cuff, and it's just a matter of trying to blend those two styles together of that sort of ad-lib football and the structure. So Fiji, it'll be interesting to see how they go. You've got Hong Kong, China, who are playing at their first World Cup as a Women's Open team. They've been at the last couple of World Cups as a mixed open side. They've played a few friendlies in between World Cup cycles as solely a Women's Open side. They played against, I think it was Singapore last year in a series of friendlies, and that was sort of tit for tat. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. It is a big jump going from the Mixed Open to the Women's Open, though. I think that can't be overstated. It's traditionally, if you're thinking of I suppose traditional mixed team where it's a lot of players centered around the three males, it can be a big jump for females to go from a mixed open environment into a women's environment where they have that responsibility of shouldering the attacking workload. But we'll see how Hong Kong go. It's I suppose another one of those unknown packages. You just don't know what you're going to get. And I think another one of those teams that are going to be unknown is Ireland. Now, Ireland have, admittedly, they've had a team at Euros, I think it was 2022, but not last year. So I think, as well, in addition, they had the Autumn International Series in 2021 as well. So they've had, a little bit of game time together as a unit. But yeah, I think... Here's the reason why, okay? So, sorry to sort of have a big pause here, but here's the reason why you just don't know what to get from Ireland, is that the fact that within the last sort of 20 years since Ireland has been established, they haven't, put much resource into an open women's program, whether that's, due to just the lack of numbers or lack of interest. I'm not entirely sure. So this World Cup will be the first World Cup where they actually take a women's open team to the tournament. They've had men's open teams, mixed open teams, plenty of masters teams as well. But in terms of women's opens, the women's open environment, this is sort of uncharted territory. So whether they're inexperienced, I'm not too sure. That's part of why they're just, they're unknown quantity. So I'd say those three teams in particular are a little bit unknown. And I suppose you can probably put the Philippines in that pool as well. They've had plenty of game time since 2019, and I think even before they've had a couple of friendlies with other Asian nations, including China last year. I think they had a run against China and Hong Kong a couple of years before that, probably well before that. But they came 15th in 2019, but just like I was saying before with Wales, you can't really read much into that because they don't have many returning from that squad. I think they've got 2 players that are returning, so it's almost like it's a completely brand new team. The women's program, they've been training hard. If you follow their women's open team on social media, but I would say that they are a developing nation when it comes to women's open touch. They've competed at the last 2 World Cups, yes. But in terms of, that sort of growth that they'd be looking for, that year-on-year growth, I just don't know whether there's enough in them to challenge for a quarterfinal position. But, we'll see. The Netherlands are another sort of newish team. They played at the last World Cup though. They came sort of bottom of the pack, but in between the last World Cup and this World Cup, they've competed mainly as a mixed team at Euros and haven't really had many reps as a women's open side in particular. And, as I mentioned before with Hong Kong, going from that mixed environment to the women's environment is pretty tough. So we'll see how they go. I don't know if they'll improve a heck of a lot from 2019 to 2024. But what they do have working in their favour is that they've got a couple of pieces that have come across from that mixed open environment into the women's open team. So we'll see how they go. I suppose it's the same with a lot of these teams in Pool B, and I think that's probably why it's harder to pick, is that you just don't know. When it comes to the nations that haven't really had the repetitions as a women's open side. Moving on to Samoa. Samoa will be an interesting one because they are coming fresh off a gold medal performance at the Pacific Games in Honiara in the Solomon Islands last year. And they're really well coached. They've got Mailata Michael Wolf, who I think doubles as the president, or he's at least on the committee there in Samoa Touch Rugby, and he'll be assisted by Pati Nasalio as well, who is a pretty handy coach himself, based in Australia. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go. They've got 7 players that are returning from that Pacific Games squad. And then the rest of their squad will be fleshed out from players that performed at their domestic competitions as well. So a couple of Aussie-based players in there. We'll see how they are able to fuse those two styles together. I paid close attention to their men's open side, who kind of had a similar thing in 2019 in Malaysia, just trying to blend, the styles of play between the players that are based in Samoa and then the players that are based overseas as well. Can be a tricky thing to juggle, but I think they'll be able to get it done. And they'll definitely want to improve on their performance from Malaysia, where they finished up 12th. I'd say they'd probably be disappointed by that performance as a whole. But changing coach, Jeff Hooper, who was at the head of that tournament, has gone on to coach Switzerland mixed at this World Cup, which has allowed Mailata Michael Wolf to jump in and take this women's squad. And first order of business, he took care of business last year, winning gold, and Samoa were able to do that in the mixed open and the men's open as well. Exciting players to look out for: Charlize Fleming, based out of Counties Manukau in New Zealand. She was a gun for them at Pacific Games. She scored 9 tries in 7 matches, but the most important one was the one in drop-off to win the gold medal in the final against the reigning champs Papua New Guinea. I was really impressed with Sailua Leola, who led the campaign. Just really great leadership, and then she linked well with the boys, so I think she wouldn't have any problem trying to shoulder that attacking workload. And then another player that I'm excited to watch is Ella Watkins, who is based out of Gold Coast. She's had, a funny old sort of 12 to 24 months, well, I suppose, 12 months playing for Samoa at the Asia Pacific Youth Touch Cup, as well as the Australia Pacifica Touch Cup last year. And she's just sort of gone from strength to strength. So those will be the danger players, I reckon, for Samoa. They'll challenge for a top 4 spot, but it's going to get really convoluted around, those sort of 3rd to 7th spots with some of the nations that they've got. I think one of the other nations that are going to be challenging for those spots will be South Africa. Traditionally pretty strong within the open grades. Their men's are probably the strongest, but their women's aren't too far away. They finished 7th in 2019. And I think with this team, what's really interesting, with the squad list that's been put out, there's 21 players that are in the women's open team list. But, it's, I suppose, just indicative of the competition within the squad. If you've got a large squad, then, you've got 21 players that you're trying to fit into 16 spots. That just naturally creates that competition, as opposed to, only having a squad of 16 or 14 or whatever it is. So a lot of them, by all accounts, are in good form at the senior interprovincial tournament, their national tournament. But what is interesting is that this team is, much like the other teams, a completely different look from the Malaysian team. The 2019 side that went to Malaysia, they've got a couple that are returning, I think maybe two. But a lot of them are, sort of 22, 23 and under. A lot of them played at the Youth World Cup that was in Malaysia 2018, and then a couple of them from the Atlantic Youth Touch Cup as well that was held up in Nottingham last year. So a very new look to that South African team, and I think it'll be interesting to see what Coach Thabo Motsumi is able to do. Thabo has played, represented South Africa himself in the men's and the mix, so he definitely knows what it takes to get the best out of his squad and perform on an international level as well. So really looking forward to see how South Africa goes. USA is much like their mixed, I'd say, and their men's as well. Well, their entire USA contingent. They're sending over a large contingent, but it's just hard to get a gauge on, how they'll perform at the tournament. They've got a pretty strong domestic competition, their nationals, as well as all of the different competitions that they hold in different states. But domestic competition is one thing, and then trying to translate that into international competition is a massive step up. Now, they've had a chance to, their mixed open and men's open sides anyway, have had a chance to travel down to New Zealand to play in their nationals as part of their preparation for the upcoming World Cup. Their women's open team didn't. Whether that is due to, it could be a whole heap of different reasons, but, we'll see whether that build up, or I suppose lack thereof, is, going to harm them or help them when it comes to when it comes to the World Cup. They've got Sal Sheeran that's coming back from an ACL injury. She'll be their main player, I would say. And they'll just be trying to build on their ninth place finish from 2019. I think they're ace up the sleeve, though, and it's the same with their whole contingent. They've had Tony Trad as well, who has gone into their camp, the USA camp, as a technical advisor, and I'm sure he'll have his fingerprints all over how the American teams perform in Nottingham. So American teams in general, right across the board, I'm personally excited to see how they'll perform just because of that, purely because of that fact, and just to see what kind of influence Trady is able to have on, all of the American teams. We'll see. And last but not least, hometown heroes, England. England are a funny old team. They've absolutely dominated when it comes to European Touch Championships. They've won, I think, something ridiculous like 10 in a row or something. But just haven't quite been able to translate that to a World Cup stage. Now, is this the year they finally do it? They've got a pretty settled squad, and that continuity, as I mentioned in the episode last week, that continuity is absolutely crucial, because it's hard going from that sort of hard reset and trying to build up a new squad and being able to do that in such a short time period with limited international competition in between. But the teams that can sort of have that build from the last World Cup to this World Cup and retain those players, they hold themselves in good stead. And that's just purely because of the fact that, you're not having to start from scratch. You build from the core players that you already have. And the players that they do have are, they're great players. You've got Emily Rona-Roper, who'll be their captain. She's been around for a wee while, as well as Zan Hudson. Those two, I think, are going to provide that leadership for England and, really, provide, I suppose those cool, calm heads under pressure. Whether they've had that in the past, I'm not too sure, but those two will definitely be able to provide it. And then just that continuity of team from, the Autumn Internationals, the Euros from 2022 and 2023. I think they've got maybe 3/4 of the squad. They might have maybe 2 or 3 debutants. So, it'll be, I'm intrigued by them to see how they go and whether they can finally sort of break through that glass ceiling and challenge for a top 4 position. Now, if they can finish second in this pool, that'll give them, I suppose, technically an easier, or hypothetically, an easier quarterfinal opponent. But as we've seen from Pool A, they've got a pretty tough pool. So that quarterfinal matchup, no matter where they finish up, is going to be crucial for them to see whether they can, finally crack that elusive top 4 that they haven't been able to nab since they've been playing at World Cup. So yeah, I'm excited to see players to watch out for. Obviously, Emily Rona-Roper, Naomi Furnett, I'm a big fan of, as well as Kenzie McNaught. So we'll see how they go. They've got great strike out wide as well. Nikki Weiss and Carly Wynn will probably have a fight over who will finish top try scorer. But yeah, they've got the potential, definitely. It's just a matter of them being able to deliver on that potential. In terms of a top 4 finish within this pool, tough one to pick. Definitely New Zealand. I think England will be in there somewhere. And then just those last 2 spots, I think, will be a shootout between Samoa, South Africa, USA, and maybe Fiji. But, it's the competition for those last 2 spots is wide open. We'll see how it ends up in the Women's Open grade, and we'll see how it ends up across the board when we tap off in Nottingham in 2 weeks' time. I think the Women's Open grade is really balanced. I think, the level of play from 2019 to 2024 should show some improvement. But I think when it comes down to the grand final, it's I'd probably bet the house on it being Australia against New Zealand. But in saying that battle for third and that precious bronze medal is going to be really, really interesting, because you've got some really strong teams that are going to be heading over, and we'll see who can nab a semi-final spot and break through to that top 4 and see who can come away with the bronze medal. But that's the Women's Open grade. Really appreciate you guys sticking around. As mentioned, we'll have the Men's Open next week, and the week after we'll be well into tap off for the World Cup. So thanks guys for sticking around. If you haven't already, subscribe, follow, like, share, comment, do all of that good stuff that can help us grow the podcast and in turn help grow Touch Football. So that's me for tonight. I will catch you next week when we break down the Men's Open sides for World Cup 2024.